Good morning, CS Beasts, and welcome to another edition of Global News Daily. This is your host, Ashton Idiart. Today we will be covering a contentious situation in the Middle East that has been going on for the last 19 years, the United States fight against the radical Islamic group known as the Taliban. Before we jump into the current situation with the battle for control of Afghanistan, I think it would be beneficial to have a brief crash course lesson on the history of the Taliban and its influence in the Middle East. The Taliban, formed in 1994, is an extremist Islamic group that took over most of Afghanistan in 1996, emerging the predominantly victorious group from the Afghan Civil War. From 1996 to 2001, the Taliban reigned in terror over the people of Afghanistan, oppressing them and massacring them in the name of their religion. September 11, 2001, however, was the beginning of the end of the Taliban's rule in Afghanistan, which they coined the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. An extremely radical Islamic terrorist group led by Osama bin Laden orchestrated a devastating terrorist attack against the United States. Over 3,000 civilians were killed. After bin Laden sought refuge in Afghanistan and the Taliban refused to turn him in, the U.S. began to invade Afghanistan, wanting to prevent them from hosting any more terrorist cells. The Taliban was overthrown and pushed almost completely out of the nation. A democratic Afghan government was instituted with the help of the United States, and everyone assumed that was the end of that. Almost no one expected the fight against the Taliban to endure to this day, which it has. What is the Taliban up to now? The fight for control over Afghanistan has been the United States' longest-standing conflict ever. The Taliban have been pushing back against the U.S.-backed Afghan government and gaining ground. Taliban estimates are as bold as saying they have taken back 80% of the country, while the government claims they still control 94%. The United States has been gradually withdrawing support from the conflict in recent years, more so under the Trump administration than any other. Trump has been negotiating with the leaders of the Taliban for quite some time and had come close to arranging a peace deal which would nearly completely remove U.S. support from Afghanistan. However, following the death of an Afghan-based American soldier, Trump halted the negotiations, much to the annoyance of the Taliban commanders. They feel it is their right to rule Afghanistan and the U.S. should stay clear away from them. They claim that the war won't be over until all forms of Western support have been withdrawn from Afghanistan. As for the civilians of Afghanistan, they appear to be somewhat indifferent to who emerges victorious in this matter. Their main concern is for the fighting between the Taliban and Afghan government to cease as it endangers them and their families. Another player in this war is the terrorist group known as ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. ISIS's influence has shrunk over the years since its inception in 1999, but it still has a presence in Afghanistan, contrary to the Afghan government's political rhetoric. ISIS leaders believe that, in the event of a peace treaty being signed with Trump, many Taliban members will join the ranks of ISIS. While ISIS and the Taliban are two different groups that want different things for Afghanistan, they can both agree that they wish the United States to quit its involvement in their affairs. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the Taliban's lead negotiator for United States affairs and co-founder of the Taliban, is of the opinion that the United States are the ones that started the war, that all they were after was one man, and now he is gone, and the war is still going on. He claims that when the United States are gone, the war in Afghanistan will end. When queried about how the Taliban will handle ISIS in the event that the U.S. does leave Afghanistan, Baradar answers that the Taliban has been the one fighting ISIS all along, not the government, and that they will be able to deal with the threat ISIS poses by themselves. Baradar goes on to explain that, upon their reinstatement of power, the Taliban will not change any of their fundamental principles they observed back in 2001. This includes their treatment of women and their civil rights. Well, that about wraps it up for today's show. For more information on the current situation in the Middle East, go to www.pbs.org/wbgh/frontline/film/Taliban-country/. This has been Global News Daily with your host, Ashton Idiart. Thanks for tuning in.